Visual Studio is a great tool for building services or building proxies for clients that want to consume those services. However, outside of Visual Studio, there's this tool called ServiceUtil.exe. It's formally named the Service Model Metadata Utility. Service Utility is a command line tool. It lets you generate WCF artifacts such as services or proxies. This is useful in automation scenarios where you want to create a batch file or perhaps a PowerShell script. One of the focuses of using Service Util is also so that you can take a contract first approach to web services. The benefits of this is that if you're working with somebody that's on a different platform, say they're on Java and they want to communicate with your .NET service, if you both take the approach of defining the contract in terms of the standards as opposed to the platform, then you're less likely to introduce platform-specific idiosyncrasies. So, to do this, you start off, you define your message, your document, your schema for that document, and the WSDL that defines the contract for the service. Once you have the WSDL defined, then you can build code that matches the contract. Okay, so that puts you on a platform-independent, standards-based approach. Now, I'm going to show you how to use Service Util to create a service and a client proxy. In this demo, I'll show you how to use Service Util to read a WSDL document that generates a service contract, and then I'll show you how to generate a proxy that can consume that new service. The service contract is going to be based upon this WSDL file that I've already created. If we scroll down within this WSDL and look at the port type, you can see that the name of the port type is iWeatherService. That will generate an interface. The operation name is getCurrentTemperature, which will generate a method on that interface. To perform the generation, use Service Util. And then use the service contract option. And will operate on the weather service WSDL file. This generates a weatherservice.cs file. If we look inside this file, you can see that we have an interface named iWeatherService. It's decorated with the service contract attribute. Within this interface, we have a method named getCurrentTemperature, and it is decorated with the service contract attribute. Now we want to use this contract. So first we'll create a new project. And I'll call it contract first. In this project, we got these default files, so we need to get rid of those. Now we need to add our new service contract. Here, I'm going to change the file name. because now I'm going to implement that service contract by adding a class. And in this class, I'm going to implement that interface. And then I'll write the code for the implementation. Now when I build, look at the messages that I get. They're warnings. They're WCF configuration validation warnings. If I go to see what they are, you'll notice that it's still using the old generated service name. We can fix that. Also, we'll make this more consistent. And then we'll change the contract. And then we'll fix the mistake I made by accidentally deleting that host tag. And this time when we build, we get a good clean build. We can hit F5 and run this service. That shows up us the WCF test client. Here I'll invoke it and notice that I get a good value back. So now we have a new service that was generated based upon the WSDL contract, not the other way around, where we were doing it with code first and using code to generate what the contract would be. Now, let's get some client code for this. Here I'm going to say service util. And now I'll use that WSDL. This time I have two files. I have a weather service CS and an output config. It overwrote the old weather service file. And here I have a whole lot more code. I have channels that communicate with the service. I've got a client proxy, and so on. So now I'll use that code too. Again, I'll create a console application. And in there, I'm going to pull in that proxy so I can use it. As a matter of fact, I want to get both the config and the proxy. This config file has the service definition from the WSDL file. Here you have a service model. And a binding to specify how the communication should occur. And you have an endpoint. Endpoints are address, bindings, and contracts. And there's my binding. And my contract is the iWeather service. We don't need this old app.config. I'm going to rename the output config to app.config. Now I'll open the program. Notice how when I built, I got this service model does not exist. That's because I need a reference. System.serviceModel. Now I'll build again. I have a good build. Now I'll use that proxy. Here's the weather service client. And here I'm going to call get current temperature. And I'll put a console read key to make sure that the console stops after it prints out that message. All that's left to do now is make sure that that's the startup project and run it. Here you can see one of the problems with generating the WSDL incorrectly. I have a port number that's different than what the service is actually using. So here's how you fix that. Stop debugging. Make sure that your base address is correct. And then there you have it. So now you've seen me use service util to read a WSDL that generates code, which is a code representation of that contract first implementation. I built a service based upon the contract code that was generated. Then I generated proxy code from the WSDL. I created a project. I pulled in the proxy code. I implemented service model, system.service model, and then I made sure that my address was specified correctly. And then I have both a service and a client that are generated from a WSDL contract using service util.